The following podcast may contain strong language and situations that may be disturbing and or triggering to some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. Hi, my name is Sean,
I'm Erin.
and this is the first official episode of the Adventures in Mental Health podcast.
Tonight we're going to talk about trauma, but before we do that, we're going to start with highs and lows. And what that basically is you go over your day, you look at one good thing that happened, one bad thing that happened, and one thing that you're grateful for or that you're looking forward to. Sean, do you want to?
Yeah, the reason why we say this is a thing we normally do in group, and we kind of want to put it out there for everyone. And this is just a thing to do as an exercise when we'll tell you ours and you do it for yourself. What was your high? What was your low? What are you looking forward to? And the reason we're looking for something to look forward to is my favorite saying. The best antidote to hopelessness is something to look forward to. I don't care if it's a cup of coffee. I don't care if it's a taco. I don't care if it's your daughter's wedding 3 years from now. But something to look forward to gives you hope. It gives you something that drives you. It gives you an anchor. It gives you something to carry you forward. And so that's why we do this.
Yeah, and then for the highs and lows, it's really important to acknowledge a low that happened, but not to focus on it. Um, it's super, super easy for people to, focus on the negative, focus on, what didn't go right. And so that's where the highs come in because every day, no matter what happens in your day, you have something really great that happened and sometimes a lot of not so great things. But we want to, like, if you can focus on the good things, it makes it a lot easier to deal with the not so fantastic things. All right, Sean, what was your high for today?
Well, my high and low is actually it's mixed. I had this realization today, and this is going to sound strange, and this is actually kind of useful because it's carryover from session zero. Um, I made a comment about how I was raised to be a soldier, and that made a few people curious. So this story actually kind of helps explain that. So what I realized today was back when I was in ROTC, in high school, I was in JROTC, and all the ROTC units in the county wanted to compete against each other because it's like anything else, but it's not a sports team. So we didn't really have a sport. I mean, there's drill team, but that's kind of like I'm sorry, guys. It's kind of like synchronized swimming. It's not my thing. I there's a lot of drill team people out there. You're awesome. You're great. Not my thing. Um, so someone in one of the units had this idea that what we were going to do is we were going to, I'm not going to use any specifics here because quite frankly, I don't want anyone who was involved to get in trouble. So I'm just going to say there is a major Marine base by where we lived. And someone had the idea of like, hey, maybe we could ask them if we could use the grounds to have a paintball league, and we'll all the units in the county will compete against each other. And we're like, we could ask, find out. And so one of our commanders, the actual instructors, mine was actually an Air Force colonel. Well, actually, lieutenant colonel. But anyway, so someone went to the base commander, and not only were they receptive, and not only were they like, "Yeah, you can totally do it," but they actually helped us set up the league. Like they were really cool. Like they helped us set up and everything. They had game masters there to inspect our gear before every match. It was a whole thing. It was awesome. It's a wonderful part of my childhood. Today, this morning, I realized something, and it was like, wait a minute. They were probably betting on us. Oh my God. 30 years ago, in that O club, there was probably like a Deadpool board with bets on our units. They were probably gambling, like we were probably fantasy football to them. That's actually kind of awesome. Like that doesn't offend me in any way, but it's like that just occurred to me 30 years later. Like they were probably betting on us. Oh, honestly, if we had known, we probably would have clicked our safeties off and said, "Let's go make someone some money." Anyway, that's kind of a mixed one. That's mine. Something to look forward to. Wow. This podcast, I am, it's taking off, and we're doing something, and I'm looking forward to it.
All right, so my high for today, I mean, it's kind of stupid, but really enjoying my cherry 7 Up out of a wine glass.
Okay, that's kind
Uh,
of hilarious. It's a little adorable.
my low, I had a rough day at work today. I had a couple of clients that just were rough. They're not bad. It was just a rough day. And yeah, so I'm really enjoying my 7 Up in a wine glass. What I'm looking forward to is I have a 3-day weekend this weekend, so I am looking forward to taking a nap on Monday.
All right. All right. So what we're going to do is at the beginning of every episode after highs and lows is we're going to introduce the topic of the evening and we're going to go over the academics of it. We're going to go over academics not necessarily from hard to reach sources. We're intentionally going to be using sources that are easily accessible. As Erin put it, she wants everything we put on the air to be easily accessible from a Google search. So it's not necessarily, while we do have a library of textbooks. We don't want it to be textbooks that you guys have to go through. We want it to be just a Google search. You can look it up. You can do your own research. That's what we want to do. So tonight we are talking about drama. Aaron?
So, what trauma is basically any event that causes an extreme emotional response. So that can be a car accident, that can be abuse, that can be assault, that could be mugging, that can be, community violence in general. There was a lot of trauma that was created during 9/11 with people watching the news. So, it's any event that causes an extreme emotional response, which it would be, nightmares, being hypervigilant, dissociating. Those are symptoms of trauma. In the first 3 months after a traumatic event, those are totally normal. Um, After 3 months, if you're still experiencing flashbacks, nightmares, dissociation, hypervigilance, all those things, then we call that PTSD. And there's actually been
Or
changes in your brain.
post-traumatic stress post-traumatic stress disorder.
Thank you. There's actually been changes in your brain that have occurred that cause this. The good news is, our brains are what we call they have a lot of what we call plasticity, which means they have the ability to do a certain amount of repair for them of themselves. This is more. There's more plasticity in childhood than adulthood, but it exists throughout our lives. And the best way to avoid PTSD is to actually talk about the traumatic event over and over and over again immediately after it happens. To anybody who will listen, write it down, um, talk to your friends, talk to your family, get a therapist in those first 3 months. That's the best way to avoid PTSD. I'm going to move on to talking about some of the changes in the brain. I just did a quick Google search because, like we said, we want all this information to be um, easily accessible by anybody. We're going to use all like verified sources, so we're getting a lot of our information from the NIH, and I'll tell you what websites I use throughout this.
What's the NIH?
NIH is National Institute of Health. The first website I'm looking at is Psych Central, and just kind of describing some of the changes that happen to the brain when we experience trauma, when we have PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder. So what happens is your hippocampus becomes smaller and less active, and this is for people who've experienced trauma in childhood and for adults. um, and what that does is it affects issues around memory and problem solving. So a smaller hippocampus in adults or damage to the hippocampus in adults can cause impulsive behavior. It can cause a lack of, a lack of impulse control. It affects memory. It affects your ability to create and store new memories. It also, a smaller hippocampus inhibits your ability to control emotions. So think of the hippocampus as the thinking part of the brain, and the amygdala, which actually gets larger with trauma, as the reactive part of the brain. So traumatic experiences can occur as early as during pregnancy. It's something that we don't really think about, but the trauma of that we experience in the womb can affect us throughout our lives. And obviously, an unborn baby isn't going to be talking about their trauma. But the first 4 years of a child's life is when the brain is developing. And so trauma experienced in early childhood has lifetime implications. Um, and the first 8 weeks, especially when a baby's born and they're learning to trust and they're bonding with their caregivers, is especially important. Now, just because a child experiences trauma early in life doesn't mean it's not fixable. It just means that those are things that we want to watch out for. So, part of the reason I'm talking about this and talking about trauma in early childhood is it sets us up for understanding behaviors as adults. In in all the years that I've been working in mental health, I have yet to work with somebody with a significant mental health issue or addiction that has not also experienced significant trauma, especially early in life. There's so brain just development. We talk about the brain stem. That's one of the first parts of the brain that develops, and it controls all of our survival responses. Our response to trauma and the changes in the brain that occur as a result of trauma are things that enable us to survive. And we develop coping skills that allow us to survive in really traumatic environments, and they serve us well for that environment. But as we grow up and become adults, or if we're adults and we experience trauma, we develop habits that serve us really, really well in the traumatic and the unhealthy environment, but not so well when we leave that environment. But the habits still stay with us. And trauma and PTSD is one of the most treatable disorders that we engage with. It's really, really, really treatable with EMDR. EMDR is an abbreviation for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And basically, what it does is it takes your traumatic memories and moves it from the emotional processing part of your brain into the more rational part of the brain. Your memories are still there, you just don't have the emotion attached to it. Um, once PTSD is treated, all that's left are the habits that have developed because of the trauma. Another well researched method for treating trauma is CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. The theory behind that is your thoughts, cognitions,
Yeah.
affect your behavior, which affects your emotions. And if you can change your thoughts and your behavior and or your emotions, then you effectively take care of what's not working. DBT is another well-researched method that's used, and that is dialectical behavioral therapy. Dialectical is the dialogues we have with ourselves, the way we talk to ourselves. One of the things I say a lot is, you hear the saying, treat others the way that you would want to be treated. And it goes to, like, we need to be kind to other people. But I would like expand that and ask you, how would you treat a small child or a puppy that you really liked? When they make a mistake, you don't yell at them and tell them how awful they are because they made this mistake. You consider the stage that the animal or the child is at, and you address the issue based on the stage they're at. So if a child of 3 spills their milk, you're not going to yell at them and tell them that they're clumsy and that they're never going to amount to anything because they spilled the milk. At 3 years old, give them a rag, you say, help me clean this up. And then going forward, let's move the milk a little farther back away from the edge of the table. With a puppy, if a puppy has an accident in the house, you don't yell at the puppy, you don't kick the puppy, you take the puppy, you say, not here, and you take the puppy outside. And you tell the puppy to go potty outside. We should be doing the same things to ourselves. When we have these intrusive thoughts, instead of just saying, oh, I'm so stupid, I keep thinking about this thing over and over and over again, um, we don't tell ourselves that we're stupid because we're not stupid. These are habits that developed because of the environment that we were in. What we do instead is we replace those thoughts. You should not be comparing yourself to where you want to be. Compare yourself to where you were yesterday, a week ago, a month ago, and have you made any improvement? And if you have, awesome. Life's about improving. All you're not done until you're dead. If you haven't, let's go. You should be going back and saying, what do I need to change to foster growth,
What's your
foster change?
What's your favorite question to clients?
Um,
Is that working for you?
oh yeah, how's that working for you? Um, client comes to me and says, well, I'm doing meth every day. They're homeless. They have a criminal record related to their substance use. The question is, how's that working for you? Is that effective for you? Is that getting you where you want to be? The client says, yeah, absolutely. Well, tell me about how that's working for you. Tell me about how that's, helping you meet your goals. Yes, it's allowing you to survive and it's allowing you to function at, this level and my hand's just right above my table. Um, but if you change your habits, you can function at a much higher level. Allow me to assist you in changing habits to make you a more functional, healthy individual.
I think that's frankly just a great definition of what we're trying to do here.
Now that we've talked kind of a little bit about what changes in the brain occur, what trauma is, how it's treated, I want to talk a little bit about some of the symptoms of PTSD. So this is just a basic Google search. Some people, when they have PTSD, their behavioral symptoms are agitation, irritability, hostility, hypervigilance, self-destructive behavior. That would be substance use. That's self-sabotaging behavior in the workplace or in relationships. Um, Social isolation. Some of the psychological effects are flashback, fear, severe anxiety, mistrust. Some of the moods is loss of interest in activities that were pleasurable at one time, guilt, or loneliness. With sleep, it can be insomnia, hypersomnia, or nightmares. Then emotional, you can have like be detached from emotions and thoughts. Those are all super, super common. It takes a clinician, either somebody with a master's degree in MFT or clinical social worker,
Oh, that's a Master's of Family Therapy.
yeah, to diagnose it. Obviously, psychologists and psychiatrists can diagnose it as well. Um, I am not, I personally, here's where I'm getting into my personal opinion. Personally, I think drugs, psych meds have very limited effect in treating PTSD. Treating PTSD is much more effectively treated with psychotherapy. That is not something that I do. I'm not qualified for that at this point to do it like officially. Um, but it's much, talk therapy, meeting with a therapist, doing some cognitive behavioral therapy. Those are much, much more effective ways in treating PTSD. Um,
So this is where I kind of come in and I add in the life lesson, so to speak. Because the thing about PTSD, Aaron said that drugs are like they can be effective. It depends on the case. As we say with all drugs, every person is different, and that's why anyone out there who experienced that, the doctors playing around with their meds, it's because every person's different, and every med works on a different person a different way, and it takes a little bit of trial and error with every individual to find that combination that works. But PTSD, it's not a chemical disorder. It's not a physical injury. It's it's an emotional problem. It is something that has cognitively happened to you because, quite frankly, and I will be honest, Aaron is currently sitting next to the poster child of PTSD. Um, PTSD is what happens when a person is asked to do something that no person should be asked to do. When you go through something horrible, or it doesn't even have to be that. Um, Maybe I'll get into specifics later, but right now I can think of there's a specific scenario I can think of where I know of people who are traumatized by witnessing what someone goes through, and that individual just has a medical condition. There's nothing terrible. Well, I mean, it's terrible, but there's nothing ex. Okay, well, it is external. It's okay. I'm saying this wrong. Um, I have a friend with a medical condition, and it's very severe, and they go through very painful episodes, and it traumatizes the people that watches it. And that's just what it is. And but that's the thing. Trauma may not necessarily even be something that's happening to you. If you're watching someone that you care about and they're going through something terrible, that can be traumatic as well because it's the disruption. It's this disruption of the status quo of normality in your mind. That is what is actually causing the problem. And the nature of trauma is that it's you want the pain to go away. That's what your brain's asking for, right?
Right, and that's where substance use comes in. And when I say like I'm not a fan of drugs to treat PTSD. The value of psych meds in treating PTSD is it can reduce symptoms enough for you to work on whatever else is going on.
Oh, anxiety alone, just
Yeah.
anxiety and depression. Those two symptoms, like you're
Uh,
anyone who's suffering from severe anxiety or depression knows exactly what I mean when I say that your life is a living hell without whichever particular ad you're taking.
but the thing is when we're talking about PTSD specifically, once the PTSD is addressed with therapy, the drugs are not as necessary or may not be necessary at all. Treating PTSD makes treating every other mental health disorder, addiction, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, MDD, which is major depressive disorder, it makes treating those much, much easier. And it reduces the symptoms that the someone who's experiencing those other issues, it reduces them enough so that they're just not as problematic. But the PTSD has to be treated, then we can come in and treat everything else.
Okay, I just want to interject real fast. There is also a new one called CPTSD, that is complex post-traumatic stress disorder. It was introduced recently in the Diagnostic and Statistics Manual 5 text revision of the American Psychological Association. We will be talking more about it later because I guarantee there are people listening who want to hear about it more. But we will be talking about it later. We just want to cover one thing at a time here.
And going forward, we're just going to say DSM-V TR. That's what we're using right now. That came out this past summer, 2022, actually 2022, not 2023. Uh, and what CPTSD is, or complex post traumatic stress disorder, and it's basically the cumulative effects of multiple traumas. So think of long term childhood abuse. Think about somebody who's coming from a war torn region, or somebody who lives in an area where community violence is commonplace. Those are people who are going to be experiencing CPTSD. Um, it's a little bit you treat it a little bit differently because you're having to tease out what's going on. That's why it's called complex. It's something that's been researched for a while now. Um, and I'm really glad that it got added to the DSM,
Oh, so am I.
because it is different than what we think of as just PTSD. PTSD can happen with just a single event, and then this differentiates somebody who has PTSD from a single event or a couple events versus somebody who's experienced trauma after trauma after trauma over the course of their life. And you treat those things different because the behaviors in somebody with CPTSD, and I can't even say that right,
It's
um,
fine.
are much more ingrained than somebody who is responding to a single event.
Yeah, this is actually, I'm going to interject there, and this is where what we call life experience or personal experience. I am a person with CPTSD, and what I can say is that the reason why the behavior has become more ingrained is because there's a concept called learned helplessness, and there's a bunch of experiments. I will look them up later and maybe post them. Actually, you know what? I'm not going to do that because actually they're kind of horrifying.
That'll actually be a whole other episode.
Yeah, actually, yeah, we'll do another episode on learned helplessness. Actually, the behavioralists who did the experiments are actually kind of horrifying. So it's they're messed up if you read those, by the way. Um, but anyway, so it's not just learned helplessness. It's not just that you're learned helplessness is the idea that you're so used to being held down that even when you're not being held down, you just lie there because like, you know what, someone's going to hold me down anyway, so why bother? That's learned helplessness. CPTSD becomes more than that because it's not just that you have learned helplessness with various scenarios related to your trauma respectively. But it's that you learn to expect it. You
Yeah,
learn to you're waiting for it to come in. You're always waiting for the next shoe to drop.
yeah.
You're waiting for the next trauma to occur.
So, I work with a large population, large portion of the population I work with are people who experience homelessness. And one of the things with people who experience homelessness is that is a long-term trauma. Um, we don't think of it as trauma, but it is.
Sure.
Being homeless is traumatic.
Yeah, it is. Trust me, I
And
know.
when you're homeless, especially if you're homeless for an extended period of time, there's a lot of like repeated traumas that occur during that, and you develop habits to like manage those traumas to survive your situation. When you become when someone is no longer homeless, when they finally get housing, whether it's they found a job and were able to find an apartment on their own, or housing was provided for them, moving from being homeless to being housed is traumatic, and you're still going to have all of those habits.
Because it's the alteration of the situation. It's
Right.
no even if it's a positive, even like for instance, yeah, actually, you know what? No, I want to introduce something, actually. This is a good time, it seems, and this is going to come up a lot. So I figured I'll just do this now. So I was actually homeless for 3 years. There was a bad period in my life. We'll talk about it later, but I was homeless for 3 years. I lived on the streets. I got out of it, and again, we'll go into it. We will go into detail how I got out of it. In fact, because part of what we're trying to do here is help people get out of the hole. And what I'd like to explain is that getting out of homelessness is not easy, and it's not something that anyone does on their own. It requires a lot, and that's part of what we're trying to help to do is help people in that situation. Um, so yeah, I'm sorry. I figured I put that out now. You wanted to move on to something else.
Yeah, I mean, so we've talked about like complex PTSD and really the difference. And we've talked a lot about PTSD in this episode, and that's just because it's the most common trauma-related disorder that we deal with. But there's others. So in children, reactive attachment disorders. So this happens a lot. I saw this a lot when I worked in group home, and it presents in one of two ways. So either you have kids that don't attach to any adult or anybody, and are completely detached from making attachments, which obviously is problematic, especially, as these kids grow up and become adults and go on to have healthy adult relationships. Until their trauma is addressed, that can't happen. They can't bond with a intimate partner. They don't really bond well with their children, and the cycle of abuse repeats.
And here's the thing I want to point out. The thing is, the reason why this can be a problem is that people may not realize they're actually suffering from these effects, meaning that a person may not be aware that they are emotionally detached. They may think that they are normal, their behavior is normal, when in fact it is antisocial and not.
Yeah.
That's I'm sorry, that's what we're kind of talking about a little.
Yeah, and then the other way that reactive attachment disorder presents is kids become overly attached, or any like really any adult, I mean, any individual. In adults, we call it, was it, attachment personality? Like, it's one of the more uncommon personality disorders, but there's a attachment personality disorder where an adult will become overly attached to people they perceive as safe, who may not be safe. But in kids, it presents as becoming
Oh,
overly
yeah, yeah,
attached
yeah, yeah.
too quickly to adults and others that they are in the care of. And every time that attachment is broken, it re-traumatizes them, and then they want to cling on to these people who are safe and comfortable for to them, much more much more tightly, which presents the opposite problem as they grow up and become adults. A lot of codependency happens this way. Um, becoming overly dependent, overly attached to intimate partners, overly dependent, overly attached. And I know it sounds odd to say overly attached to your children, but
No,
you
no,
you can
that's not
become
weird.
overly attached where you can't stand to be separated from your children or your partner, and that's not healthy.
No, separation anxiety in any individual for any reason is not a great thing. I mean, come on. I mean, my old dog Monica, she would howl when I went to work. I
Yeah,
mean, my neighbors heard it. They thought she was dying. I want literally my neighbor once walked out. He's like, "Is your dog okay?" I'm like, "Yeah, she just doesn't like it when I go to work. Sorry."
yeah. Another thing is disinhibited engagement, social engagement disorder. Um, that is where you're like where we see excessive promiscuity involved. And like for me, like I'm not one to judge or to tell anybody how they should engage with their intimate partners. But when someone I'm working with has a stated goal of I want to get married, I want to meet somebody, get married, and have a family. If they're going out and they're hooking up every night, that's not gonna help them reach their goal. And so,
It depends on what the goal is. I mean,
well, I mean,
frankly, I mean, frankly.
no, what I'm saying is if their stated goal is to meet someone, get married, have a family, hooking up is not going to help them meet that goal. Um,
Oh, there's a lot of jokes I could make,
yeah, let's
but
not.
I'm just not. Yeah, no.
Then there's adjustment disorder. You have that's exactly what it sounds like. You have difficulty adjusting to whatever your situation is. Sometimes you wouldn't diagnose somebody like that if they were homeless. Of course, you're going to have a difficult time adjusting to being homeless. Adjustment disorder is where you have difficulty with normal adjusting to normal changes that occur in your life. New job, new living situations, like you move from one apartment to another. So that's that. And then prolonged grief disorder. That is something that occurs. That's diagnosed when somebody loses a loved one or loses somebody that is kind of in their outer circle, and then has, and I don't want to say abnormal grief response, but where they're just not able to function because of the grief they feel over the loss.
Yeah, I've got a story for that. Tell you about, dude. And so when I was growing up, there was a couple of guys, and we were real tight. And what happened was when we were all about 2021, one of the guys got rapid onset leukemia, and he came home one day and he thought he had the flu. He didn't feel good. His wife ran him a bath, and he got in the bath, and he passed out, and she couldn't revive him. And obviously, paramedics, all that was involved. They revived him with oxygen, and he was able to get up for a second, but then he passed back out and literally never regained consciousness. Um, anyway, so my buddy, after that happened, um, his wife was talking to me one day, and she said, "Yeah, he just takes a ball of scotch and just goes to dude's grave and hangs out with him and just gets drunk and talks to him." Like, really? Okay, that's something we're gonna have to deal with. But yeah, that is a prolonged and maladaptive grief response. Grief is natural and a normal and good thing. However, there are responses that when you're at your buddy's grave in the middle of the night on a weekly basis while your wife is wondering where you are pounding a ball of scotch, you might want to start looking at your habits a little bit, and you might want to, I don't know, get a therapist. Just saying.
Yeah. And, I want to say that there are very normal responses to trauma that shouldn't be, diagnosed as a disorder. When you put your hand on a hot stove and you burn yourself, your normal, natural response is to not put your hand back on the hot stove. What we're talking about is things that maybe things that we're talking about things that habits that develop and that inhibit your ability to function as a human being, affect your relationships, affect your ability to have a job, affect your ability to carry out what we call activities of daily living, bathing, eating, um, just, going out and living life and being out in public. We're talking about serious, like, where these activities are seriously impacted because of the trauma that you experienced.
By the way, sometimes we'll refer to these things, and we're going to say accidentally, we're going to try not to, but we might say accidentally the term ADL. And the term ADL means activity of daily living. In the mental health community, it's a big metric for how we can tell what the client in like a crisis residential is doing. Like,
Yeah.
are they doing their ADLs? Are they showering? Are they changing clothes? Are they did they eat breakfast? Like that's how we measure what's going on.
Yeah. The other thing that we look at is independent living skills. And those are, being able to go to work, being able to have relationships with family and friends, going grocery shopping, those kinds of things. And somebody who's suffering from a trauma related disorder, all of those things are significantly disrupted. Um, I'm about ready to wrap this up.
Yeah, no, I think we have a good show for this one. I know we
So,
were trying to do an hour, but maybe half hours is a good call.
yeah. And, next time I want to talk about like how you as a friend or family member can support somebody who's living with trauma. What I want to do with this podcast is we're going to talk about a disorder or something mental health related, and then talk about how the person who's living with what's going on can be supported by the people around them. Um,
Once again, the whole purpose and what happened caused this podcast was we were driving home from work one day, and every day we get asked by clients, or not, well, by clients, yeah, by clients and their families, what can I do? What can I do? What can I do? And we were driving home one day, and Aaron just said, we should just make a podcast. We should just broadcast to everyone what they can do, what it is, and how they can help. And so that's what we're doing.
yeah, and it's not just so the flip side of families who want to be appropriately supportive, and I say appropriately because there's a way to be inappropriately supportive. Um,
Oh, yeah.
are family members who come in and start trying to dictate their loved one's treatment. And while I appreciate the involvement and having somebody who's that invested in their loved one can be an asset, it can also be a barrier to recovery. And you're going to hear me say recovery a lot. You're going to hear me say relapse a lot. And that's not necessarily um, relating specifically to substance use. Any mental health issue, um, every mental health issue that we deal with, we talk about recovery. Recovery is just dealing with the mental health issues so that you become more functional. We might describe somebody as low functioning or high functioning, and that is not related to their actual ability. That's actually, we're looking at how they're engaging in their activities of daily living and independent living skills at that moment in time. And are they engaging in those and are they able to complete those without assistance? Um, and so that's what we're talking about recovery. Recovery is possible with every single mental health issue. The one thing to remember is recovery may not mean that you go back exactly to the how they were, you're gonna have what's a new normal. And I hate that term, but it's an accurate term in this case.
Residual effects.
Yeah. The other thing, I just like my thought just like flew away. Hold on a second.
Just be honest, man. Just be honest.
Um, so you're also gonna hear me say relapse. Relapse is not necessarily relating to a substance use issue. It is any mental health issue. Recovery is not a straight road. It's not a linear path. There's all kinds of twists and turns, and that is why we call this adventures in mental health, because there's setbacks and there's things that you're going to struggle with. So when you have an increase in symptoms and a decrease in functioning, that's relapse. And relapse is something that is part of recovery for the vast majority of people who live with a mental health issue.
Yeah, and occasionally there's a freaking dragon for no apparent reason. That's why it's an adventure. Um, little pun in there.
Yeah.
But
So
yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think next week we're going to talk about how you can appropriately assist your loved ones. And just as we've had many family members say, "How am I going to help my loved ones?" Just as many family members try to dictate the treatment without the input of the person that is being treated.
Yeah, or the clinician.
Right. And that's not appropriate either. And in fact, one of the things that made today so difficult is I spent 125 minutes talking to a parent who was, trying to dictate to me what was going to be happening with their child without consultation of their child, their adult child, and their adult child I could tell was sitting in the room listening to their parent talk about them on the phone in very negative terms. And that's not helpful for family members to do either. And while I appreciate this person's dedication to their child, that's not appropriate advocacy. For me, that's a distraction for me from treating not just their child, but all of my other clients, because what is it, hour and 25 minutes? That's 2 hours.
Well, it pulled you away from the treatment of other clients. It negatively affects your client, obviously. And let's be faced, everything is global. Nothing happens in a vacuum. Everything is a butterfly effect. So it affects him, and he's going to affect the other clients. And her being exposed to the other clients may affect them too. So she's essentially
Well,
a liability.
yeah, I mean, there was limited exposure. The only client that she was exposed to was her own child. Um, and you know, with her, it's not that her child isn't important, and it's not that she doesn't have legitimate concerns. She absolutely does. Um, the issue is with her current pattern of behavior, she's a barrier to her child's recovery, and actually exacerbates the symptoms he has. And so how as a loved one do you not do that? Because it's really, really difficult when you care and when you're emotionally invested to find a good balance. And that's really what I want to talk about with the next episode.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, we're going to wrap this up for tonight, guys. Fantastic. Let us know what you think, and we will see you next time.
And all the regular like, subscribe, please share. Thank you for listening.